Bastille Day. So this summer I was sitting in Saint-Tropez getting fucked up, listening to Rufus, and it occurred to me that it's quite ironic that, an American here is having fun, partying, when, it was the American Revolution and the financing of it that was one of the proximate causes of the fall of Louis XVI and ushering in of the French Revolution. But where we stand today in the Fifth French Republic is at a crossroads. What are they going to do? They're broke as fuck, and is the ECB going to print the money to save them? I think that Frexit is a real possibility, and the threat of France leaving the euro, followed by Germany, will get the ECB to print a fuck ton of money. So let's go through the slides. So I don't know if you've read this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, and I want to talk about countries. Who's a rich country? Who's a poor country? And I want to designate rich and poor based on a net portfolio balance. And this is basically how many assets a country owns abroad versus how many assets foreigners own in their own country. And we want to see what this amount of money is. Obviously, a positive balance means you're wealthy. A negative balance means you're poor. But obviously, that's a moralistic term. More, we should talk about a surplus and a deficit, because everything must balance out in the end. Any country that has a surplus, there's an equal and opposite deficit. So who's rich? Germany and Japan are the wealthiest countries by this metric in the world. Germany has a net portfolio balance of almost $5 trillion, and Japan has one of almost $4.4 trillion. Now, this is quite interesting because if you think about 80 years ago, both of these countries were destroyed and lost the war, yet in 4 generations, they have recovered their swag, and now they're the richest countries in the world. Who's poor dad? France and America. These are the 2 poorest countries by this metric, net portfolio balance. The United States has a minus 58% of GDP net portfolio balance. And I have a photo here of the great city of San Francisco, and the Tenderloin looks like a piece of shit, smells like a piece of shit. I fucking hate San Francisco. Next up is France, negative 38% of GDP. And here's a recent protest that is happening, I think a month ago if this photo was taken. And what is notable here is, what's the difference between France and America? Well, America has their reserve currency, the US dollar. Everybody uses the dollar. Everybody essentially implicitly finances America. So they can issue bonds. They have like $28 trillion of outstanding debt in the world. But France does not have the global reserve currency. Yet Germany and Japan, through their surplus, are financing the French welfare state, are financing French politicians and what they are doing for their own people. Now, this situation persisted for 80 years, but I believe that it's going to change very soon. Why? This man here, Donald Trump, I'm sure you all are familiar. This is him speaking at the UN recently. What has Trump been about since 2016 when he took the throne of the Pax Americana? He's been about America first. What does that mean? It means reversing the surplus and deficit disparity between countries globally. He is tired of America essentially being financed by the rest of the world, but the rest of the world owning assets in America. He believes they should own assets in their own country, let American companies sell their exports, and get wealthy just like Germany and Japan. And so by ushering in these America first policies, Germany and Japan have to respond with Germany first and Japan first policies, because their export market, the US market, is going to be closed to them. So they need to take these savings, repatriate them, and bring them back on shore, which basically means they can no longer finance deficit countries like France and like America. So, FAFO stands for fuck around and find out. Here is the chart that everyone who is interested in whether or not France is going to leave the euro and when it should happen needs to understand. Now, I took, this is a Bloomberg chart, and basically what I did was the European Central Bank, the ECB, every month publishes the net balances in the target system, and I'll get to what that is in a second. France, as of early 2021, ran a surplus, meaning capital was coming in to France. So then I said, okay, let's take a difference between today and 2021, and let's see which country has gotten, capital has left Europe. I mean, sorry, not left Europe, left their banking system, gone somewhere else. The solid white line is France. It's the worst in the whole Eurozone, meaning that French savers and French capital is afraid of something. And they are leaving. They are saying, I don't want a euro in a French bank. I want a euro in a German bank, in a bank in Luxembourg, somewhere else in Europe, but fuck no, I am not putting my capital in France. And the worse this ratio gets, the more we have to be worried about capital controls and other means by which French politicians are going to rectify this imbalance. So what is a target balance? Essentially, to make the euro work with you, when you have, I think there's like 17 or 18 different central banks and banking systems, the ECB runs a centralized clearing system where Germany and France can run a surplus and deficit versus each other rather than every central bank having an account with every other central bank. And it balances. And so what do you have to think about to conceptualize what a target is? Imagine if the euro ceased to exist and you had capital in a particular European country and they redenominated their currency from the euro back into the franc or back into the Deutschmark. Would you be okay with that? Do you want to own a franc or a lira or a Deutschmark? And make that mental calculation and then say, okay, well, maybe I don't want to own a franc because it's a deficit country. They're no longer being financed. I think there's capital controls coming. Maybe I should take my euro while it's fungible, move it over to Germany, and if something happens, I get a Deutschmark. And Germany's the strongest, richest country in the Eurozone, and my capital is going to be safer there. So that's how to think about the target system. And as this target deficit gets worse and worse and worse, it is like the canary in the coal mine for you to understand that the French people are worried. Fuck what I say on the stage. I don't fucking know. I live in Singapore. What does a French person think about their own system? They're telling you in very clear language that they do not want to be in the French banking system. So who is this lovely lady here? I call her the crocodile countess. This is Christine Lagarde, a French lady, lawyer by training, yet she has assumed the position as the head of the European Central Bank. Now, what is her job? Her job is to make sure that the ECB continues to exist. Her job is not to make sure that the will of the people in every other European country is respected. And if you read between the tea lines of what happened in Greece between 2011 and 2012, and other elections around the Eurozone, you see the hands of the ECB presenting these outcomes where if you don't do what we say, we're not going to print the money to buy your bonds. And then your government falls. And then you have to depreciate your currency. And then you can't buy oil or food or medicine. So shut the fuck up, people. Vote for the party we tell you to vote for, and we're going to continue to finance you. So she is all about maintaining control of the ECB over every other European country. How is she doing that? By withholding printing money. So if you take a look at global central banks in COVID, the ECB has been relatively tight because they want to make sure they have control. They say, hey, you can only spend 3% of your GDP as a deficit. I don't know why they chose a number, they just did. But if you are spending too much money, we will not support your bond market until you pass an acceptable budget. And this is the problem that domestic politicians face, especially in France. So when we come to Emmanuel Macron, the teacher fucker, he's fucked. He's got to ride 2 horses with 1 ass. On one hand, the French people want to work 3 hours a day, retire at 45, drink some nice wine. But the ECB says, no fucking way. We're not going to let you print all this money. We're not going to support your bond market, because what does that say to all the other countries? We have to make an example of you to make sure that everybody else falls in line with what we say. And so you have this constitutional crisis in France right now, where in the past year, 2 prime ministers have failed to pass a French budget. And when there's even a hint that the government might follow an austere policy towards government spending, meaning just reduce it from the levels at where it is today, there's protests in the street. There's strikes. The people are saying, we don't want this. We want to print money for France, for us. We don't care what the ECB says. We don't care what's happening in Brussels at the European Council. And this is why Macron is in an unwinnable position. So, what happens when you have to plug a hole and you are a government? The first thing you do is you steal money from the foreigners. Now, you might say, oh, France is a capitalist country, they respect property rights and all that other nonsense. But at the end of the day, when the solvency of the state is threatened, they will always steal the money of the foreigners first. And the foreigners are the ones who own all the assets. 53% of all stocks and bonds in France are owned by foreigners. I forgot the guy's name, but the head of the Communist Party in Parliament had a quote a few months ago basically saying, don't worry about us taxing more of the French people. All of our debt is owned abroad. We're just going to take their money first. So domestic capital controls will follow the appropriation of foreign assets. Because once you steal the money from the foreigners, well then obviously the French people are like, well, maybe I'm next. Maybe I should take my euro and send it over to Deutsche Bank rather than keeping it in SocGen. And so then you have to put domestic capital controls on. And then at the end of the day, private capital that is left in France will be forced to buy government bonds at a rate that the government can afford, which doesn't necessarily mean the best value for you as a capital holder. So what are the implications of France taking money from the foreigners or possibly putting in capital controls? The first problem is that French assets are owned within the EU banking system. And if the French politicians decide that they're going to sequester foreign capital in their bond and equity markets, it would essentially cause the bankruptcy of the entire banking system because banks are levered. And based on a tier 1 capital ratio and losses stemming from the imposition of capital controls on foreigners, I estimate it could lead to approximately a 5 trillion euro bailout by the ECB to make sure that the EU banking system remains solvent. The next is what do foreign central banks do? What is the Bank of Japan going to do when $200 billion of their money is stuck in France? Are they not going to print money, hand it to their own domestic institutions who have lent this money to France to make sure that their financial system is sound, to make sure there's no knock-on effects? What is the Fed going to do in the US? This has presented them this awesome opportunity to excuse away the need for more money printing because there's this global contagion effect of the euro possibly breaking out. Now, obviously, I can't time any of this. How do we understand when this is going to happen? We have to look at the target system. Even though it's only a monthly snapshot, it's the best that we have to understand if the people on the ground who are the most knowledgeable about what the French capital thinks, if this deficit continues to blow out on a monthly basis, then we have to worry about our capital in the EU. So will the euro survive? Probably, maybe, I don't know. It doesn't really matter from us as a crypto standpoint. If this contagion starts, everyone's going to ask, who's next? What other weak country who no longer can finance themselves are going to have to introduce capital controls? And if I have capital in that country, I need to get out. I need to do something else. No country will restrict themselves to a 3% spending limit on a federal deficit when you have the people clamoring for more, not less, spending. And finally, it comes down to the Germans. What will they decide? Do they want to stay in the euro, or do they not want to stay in the euro? I don't know. It's a political decision. But again, as investors, we do not like uncertainty. We do not like having to handicap these binary political outcomes, especially when the majority of us are not Germans. We're not French. We are not Europeans. We don't understand how they think and what they're going to do. So when we come to the ECB, they have a choice. Print the money now, print the money later. Print now. Accept that a country can spend whatever it likes domestically on their own population. Or restart quantitative easing to print the euros, to buy the national bonds, so the politicians can fund their spending. But this means a loss of control. This means sovereignty moves back to the people at a national level. Print later. Print the 5 trillion after France threatens to leave the euro and sequesters assets. Restart quantitative easing to buy the bonds of the countries that are left because investors don't want to finance these governments anymore. And still lose control. The euro is fundamentally fucked. It just took 30 years for us to figure it out. The ECB has no option. They will print money. Because if they don't print money, the euro is definitely dead. But if they do print money, there's a chance that Christine Lagarde, or whoever else replaces her, can still rule Europe. So as an investor, Why would you fuck around and find out? Even the threat of being redenominated in these weaker currencies should prompt you to think about, why should I own any of these assets? So let's look historically since COVID. How have European assets performed versus other opportunities? So this is in white, the MSCI World Stock Index versus the Euro Stoxx 50, which is like the S&P 500, but for the Eurozone. And we've seen the Euro Stoxx has marginally underperformed the world equity markets. So if you're buying stocks, there's no reason to be in Europe. What about versus the real assets? Bitcoin in magenta, gold in green. Oh, sorry, that's magenta green, and other equity markets and their bond market. European assets are dog shit versus true money, gold and Bitcoin. Seeing this chart, listening to what I said, seeing what the French people are doing on the ground, what is going through your head by owning anything in Europe? It makes no fucking sense. Get out while you can get out. And so I end this by putting this chart back on the screen, because it's the most important chart if we want to understand what and when the ECB is going to print money. And so I hope that everyone in this room says, hey, maybe every month I should just go on the ECB website, take a look at this target balance. If you've got a Bloomberg, you can go on Bloomberg and you can find the different balances for all the member countries. But I want to emphasize that the ECB is out of options. They're out of time. Lagarde can't maintain control while France is leaving. It's too big to fail, yet too big to bail out. And as Bitcoin and crypto investors, we know the policy response. We know that trillions of euros will be printed, whether France leaves or doesn't leave the euro, because America is changing the world order, whether you like it or not, and deficit countries like America will switch to surplus, and surplus countries will switch to deficit. But if you don't have the reserve currency like France, who is going to buy these piece of shit bonds? Thank you very much, everyone.